Welcome back to Sissy Maya. Make sure to subscribe to our channel to never miss an update. Additionally, consider subscribing to my Patreon to get access to these features, and much more.
Daniel sat at his desk, staring blankly at the computer screen in front of him. He had always felt a secret desire to cross-dress, but the fear of being discovered and outed had held him back. That was, until one fateful day when he decided to wear a bra underneath his men's clothing to work. Daniel was a successful businessman in his mid-30s, living in a bustling city. He had a loving wife, 2 beautiful children, and a stable job. On the surface, he appeared to have it all. But beneath the facade, Daniel felt a deep sense of dissatisfaction and unfulfillment. He had always felt different, like he was living a life that wasn't truly his. As Daniel adjusted his tie and buttoned up his shirt, he couldn't help but feel a thrill of excitement. Today was the day he would take the first step towards embracing his true self. He slipped on the bra, feeling the soft fabric against his skin. It felt strange, but also liberating. He took a deep breath and headed out the door, ready to face whatever the day had in store for him. The office was bustling with activity as Daniel arrived. He greeted his co-workers with a friendly smile, trying to act as normal as possible. But inside, his heart was racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone would somehow discover his secret. As the day went on, Daniel found himself becoming increasingly paranoid. He was convinced that everyone was staring at him, that they could somehow sense the bra he was wearing underneath his clothing. He jumped at every little sound, every unexpected glance. But despite his fear, Daniel couldn't deny the feelings of excitement and liberation that the bra gave him. It felt like a small act of rebellion, a way of asserting his true identity. And as the day wore on, Daniel found himself becoming more and more determined to continue wearing the bra, no matter what the consequences. But what would happen if Daniel's secret was discovered? Would he lose everything he held dear, including the respect of his co-workers, family, and friends? Or would he find the acceptance and understanding he had always longed for? Only time would tell. Daniel sat at his desk, trying to focus on his work. But his thoughts kept drifting to the bra he was wearing underneath his shirt. It was a simple, lacy number, the kind he had always been drawn to. He had purchased it online, along with a few other items, hiding the packages carefully so as not to arouse suspicion. He had never worn a bra before, and the sensation was strange but exhilarating. It made him feel more feminine, more in touch with the part of himself he had always kept hidden. But he couldn't shake the feeling that someone would somehow discover his secret. As the morning wore on, Daniel's anxiety grew. He jumped at every unexpected sound, every glance from his co-workers. He was convinced that everyone knew, that they were all whispering about him behind his back. But then, just as he was about to give in to his panic, he received a surprise message from his boss, Mrs. Karen. "Can you stop by my office when you get a chance?" she wrote. "I'd like to discuss some project details with you." Daniel's heart raced as he made his way to Mrs. Karen's office. He couldn't imagine what she could want to discuss with him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it had something to do with his cross-dressing. When he arrived at her office, Mrs. Karen gestured for him to take a seat. She smiled politely, but there was something in her eyes that made Daniel uneasy. "I've been noticing some changes in your work performance lately," she began. "Your productivity seems to have decreased, and you've been missing deadlines." Daniel's heart sank. He had suspected that his cross-dressing was affecting his work, but he hadn't realized how obvious it had become. "I'm sorry," he stammered. "I've been dealing with some personal issues lately." Mrs. Karen leaned forward, her gaze softening. "You know you can talk to me about anything, Daniel. I'm here to support you." Daniel took a deep breath, feeling a rush of gratitude towards his boss. He had never expected her to be so understanding. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice wavering. "I've been cross-dressing." Mrs. Karen's expression remained steady, but Daniel could see the shock and surprise in her eyes. "I understand if you need to let me go," Daniel continued. "But I wanted to be honest with you. to explain why my performance has been slipping." Mrs. Karen was silent for a long moment, her eyes studying Daniel's face. "Daniel," she said finally, "I want you to know that your secret is safe with me. And I want to help you in any way I can." Daniel felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He had never expected such acceptance and support. "Thank you," he whispered. Daniel woke up early the next morning, feeling a sense of excitement and anticipation. He had decided to wear the bra to work again, and he couldn't wait to feel the sensation of the soft fabric against his skin. He slipped on the bra, taking a moment to admire himself in the mirror. He looked different, more feminine somehow. He felt a surge of confidence and pride, knowing that he was being true to himself. As he headed out the door, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that today would be a turning point. He had been living a lie for so long, hiding his true self from the world. But now, he was ready to embrace who he really was. The commute to work was nerve-wracking. Daniel was convinced that everyone could see the bra through his shirt, that they knew his secret. He kept his gaze fixed on the road, trying to ignore the stares and whispers he imagined around him. But when he arrived at the office, everything seemed normal. His co-workers greeted him with friendly smiles, and there was no sign of the judgment or disapproval he had feared. As the day wore on, Daniel found himself becoming more and more comfortable in the bra. It felt like a second skin, a part of him that he couldn't imagine living without. But then, just as he was starting to relax, he received an unexpected phone call. It was his wife, Skylar. She was hysterical, crying and shouting. "I found your bras," she screamed. "I know what you've been doing. How could you do this to me?" Daniel felt his heart sink. He had always feared this moment, the moment when his secret was revealed. "I can explain," he stammered. "Please, just let me explain." But Skylar was beyond reason. She was consumed by anger and hurt, and she refused to listen to Daniel's attempts to explain himself. "I never want to see you again," she sobbed. "I'm leaving you, Daniel. I can't be married to someone who would lie to me like this." Daniel felt tears streaming down his face as he hung up the phone. He had never expected his secret to have such devastating consequences. But as he sat at his desk, feeling the weight of his wife's rejection, Daniel knew that he couldn't go back. He couldn't hide who he really was any longer. From that day forward, Daniel would have to face the consequences of his actions. He would have to navigate the challenges of living as a crossdresser, and find the strength to be true to himself, no matter what the cost. Daniel sat at his desk, staring blankly at the computer screen in front of him. He had been living as a crossdresser now, and the novelty had worn off. He was no longer excited by the sensation of the bra against his skin, or the feeling of being true to himself. Instead, he was consumed by fear and uncertainty. His wife had left him, taking the children with her. He had been forced to move out of their family home, and was now living in a cramped apartment on the other side of town. His job was in jeopardy too. His boss, Mrs. Karen, had been understanding at first, but Daniel's performance had continued to slip. He had missed deadlines, forgotten important meetings, and struggled to focus on his work. Now, he was facing the possibility of being fired. He had been called into a meeting with Mrs. Karen, and he could sense the disapproval in her eyes. "Daniel," she began, "I've been noticing some serious issues with your work performance. Your productivity has decreased, and you've missed several important deadlines." Daniel felt his heart sink. He knew what was coming. "I'm sorry," he stammered. "I've been dealing with some personal issues." Mrs. Karen leaned forward, her gaze stern. "Daniel, I've been patient with you, but I can't ignore these problems any longer. Your job is on the line." Daniel felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He had never expected his secret to have such devastating consequences. "I understand if you need to let me go," he whispered. "But I wanted to be honest with you, to explain why my performance has been slipping." Mrs. Karen was silent for a long moment, her eyes studying Daniel's face. "Daniel," she said finally, "I'm going to give you one more chance. But you need to get your act together, and fast. Daniel felt a surge of gratitude towards his boss. He had never expected such understanding. "Thank you," he whispered. From that day forward, Daniel found that his relationship with his boss only grew more strained. He struggled to focus on his work, and his performance continued to suffer. He knew that he was on thin ice, and that one more mistake could cost him his job. But he couldn't seem to find the motivation to change. He was consumed by fear and uncertainty, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was trapped in a downward spiral. But then, just as he was about to give up hope, he received an unexpected phone call. It was his wife, Skylar. She sounded different, calmer, more composed. "Daniel," she said, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. And I want to talk to you." Daniel felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for reconciliation. "I'm listening," he said, his voice trembling. Skylar took a deep breath. "Daniel, I know I reacted badly when I found out about your cross-dressing. But I've been doing some research, and I've learned a lot about what it means to be a cross-dresser." Daniel felt tears streaming down his face. He had never expected such understanding from his wife. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I never meant to hurt you." Sarara cut him off. "Daniel, I'm not here to blame you. I'm here to tell you that I love you, and I want to support you. I want to understand what you're going through, and I want to help you in any way I can." Daniel felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He had never expected such acceptance and support from his wife. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you so much." From that day forward, Daniel and Skylar began the long process of rebuilding their relationship. It wasn't easy, and there were many setbacks and challenges along the way. But with each step, Daniel found that living authentically was the greatest reward of all. He was no longer living a lie, hiding his true self from the world. He was being true to who he really was, and he was finding the acceptance and understanding he had always longed for. Daniel now started feeling a sense of peace and acceptance. He had been living as a crossdresser for several days now, and he had finally found the acceptance and understanding he had always longed for. His relationship with his wife, Skylar, had grown stronger than ever. They had faced many challenges along the way, but they had always found a way to overcome them. Daniel's job was going well too. His boss, Mrs. Karen, had become a mentor and friend to him. She had helped him navigate the challenges of living as a crossdresser, and he had found a new sense of purpose and motivation at work. The office was bustling with activity as Daniel arrived that morning. He greeted his co-workers with a friendly smile, feeling a sense of belonging and connection. As he sat down at his desk, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that today was going to be a special day. He had been feeling a sense of excitement and anticipation building inside him, and he knew that something wonderful was about to happen. The day wore on, and Daniel found himself becoming more and more excited. He had a feeling deep inside him, a sense of knowing that something was about to change, something was about to shift. And then, just as he was about to give up hope, he received an unexpected phone call. It was his boss, Mrs. Karen. Her voice was shaking, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Daniel," she said, "I need to see you in my office. Right away." Daniel felt his heart sink. He couldn't imagine what Mrs. Karen could want to discuss with him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it had something to do with his cross-dressing. When he arrived at her office, Mrs. Karen gestured for him to take a seat. She smiled politely, but there was something in her eyes that made Daniel uneasy. "Daniel," she began, "I've been doing some thinking. And I've come to a decision." Daniel felt his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't imagine what Mrs. Karen could be about to say. "Daniel," she continued, "I want to offer you a promotion. I want to make you the vice president of our company." Daniel felt his jaw drop. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "But there's one condition," Mrs. Karen added. "You need to be honest with everyone about who you are. You need to come out as a crossdresser, and be true to yourself." Daniel felt tears streaming down his face. He had never expected such acceptance and support from his boss. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you so much." From that day forward, Daniel found that his life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. He was no longer living a lie, hiding his true self from the world. He was being true to who he really was, and he was finding the acceptance and understanding he had always longed for. The journey had not been easy, and Daniel had faced many challenges along the way. But with each step, he had found that living authentically was the greatest reward of all. And he had discovered that love, acceptance, and understanding were the most powerful forces in the world. A few years later, Daniel sat in his office, looking out over the bustling city below. It had been several years since he had first started wearing a bra underneath his men's clothing, and he couldn't believe how far he had come. He had faced many challenges along the way, and there had been many moments of fear and uncertainty. But he had always found the strength to be true to himself, to embrace who he really was. His relationship with his wife, Skylar, had grown stronger than ever. They had faced many challenges along the way, but they had always found a way to overcome them. Daniel's job was going well too. He had been promoted to vice president of the company, and he had found a new sense of purpose and motivation at work. As he sat at his desk, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that his journey was far from over. There would always be challenges and setbacks, moments of fear and uncertainty, but he knew that he had the strength and the courage to face them. He had found the acceptance and understanding he had always longed for, and he knew that he could handle whatever the future held. Daniel leaned back in his chair, feeling a sense of peace and contentment. He had come a long way from the fearful, uncertain man he had once been. And he knew that he would always have the strength and the courage to be true to himself, to embrace who he really was, and to live the life he had always dreamed of. The end.